Johnson opened up a whole new family for us. We went up to Belgium, we went to the Luxembourg Fest, we marched in this flag that just refuses to stay up there. And we got this crest, and it was all great fun. And they have festivals all the time that you guys can participate in. And I'd like to point out this word here. People from Luxembourg call themselves Luxies, L-U-X-I-E, proud of our Luxie heritage. So you are Luxembourgers because we come from that part of the world. But there's one problem. Croat is not a common name in Luxembourg or in Belgium. So where did that name come from? It was quite a mystery. And Carol talked to a university researcher in Europe, and he felt that our name might have come from a mercenary soldier because it was somebody who immigrated to that area and then stayed there. And so here is a section of this that is all about this ancestor who came from Croatia. How do we know they came from Croatia? Because if you get your DNA done, like my brother Tom Croat did, it was a real surprise. It said that his ancestor came from Slovenia and Croatia. Croatia. We had always suspected that our name had something to do with the country, Croatia. And now here's a real solid link. So keep in mind that people didn't always have last names. Up until the Middle Ages, up until the 13th, 14th century, people didn't have last names at all. They were called Randall, the wheelsmith, or Chris, the man who makes wagons. So, you know, you didn't have a last name. So, if we had a mercenary soldier who came originally from Croatia and he came to Northern Europe, it might be a very common thing to call him John the Croat because he was from Croatia. So, of course, we'll never know because the records just simply aren't there. But there's a lot of research has been done about these Croatian military units. If you want to read this, or you can look on Wikipedia. There's a lot of really good information on Wikipedia. And Croatians were among the most sought after mercenary units. If you remember from your American history classes, the Hessians came to fight in our American Revolution. They were not from here, they were from Europe. They were hired to fight by the British. So that was a very common practice then. And because they didn't have surnames, our ancestor might have just gotten transplanted there, and then the name stuck, John the Croat or Nicholas the Croat. Croatian soldiers were fighting in Northern Europe as early as the 1600s. And note the scarf around their neck. This was their trademark. They were cavalrymen, and they wore these neckerchiefs for hygienic purposes, you know, to keep the sweat off their neck and whatnot. But when they were going across the plains, the scarves would fly behind them very, very beautifully. And when they got to Northern Europe, and particularly in France, the people there said, "Mon Dieu, we have to have them." And that's where we get the necktie. It came from the Croatian cravat, the word cravat. In fact, in Croatia, they have a huge Roman amphitheater, and I don't know if they do it every year, but they put a great big necktie around it. And it's an art installation. It's really something to see. What does Croatia look like today? This is what Croatia looks like. I have been there. This is Dubrovnik, down in the lower right. Marco Polo actually came to that very same spot. and it looks exactly like that today. They have huge city walls. It's amazing to think that the history of this town and this country goes back so far that Marco Polo, does anybody remember when Marco Polo was? 1400 maybe. Came to that very same place. And yet it's a beautiful country and natural wonders. The Croatian mercenaries came from an area called the Dinaric Alps. It's part of the Alps, and it kind of branches off and goes down into the Balkan Peninsula right here, where my arrow is. And they were known as great fighters and cavalrymen. So really, that distance is not very far. I went on Google Maps just to give you, wait a minute, a point of reference. It's like going from Des Moines to Denver, something that thousands and thousands of American pioneers did in the 1800s. It really wouldn't be that big of a walk. So there was a great need for military soldiers back in the 1800s because there was just one war after another. A bunch of kings all fighting for territory. So they needed soldiers. And maybe our soldier met somebody and stayed in Luxembourg. But we'll never know. But we do have the DNA proof to show that our ancestors came from this region. In Luxembourg, there are 3 towns associated with Croats: Lannon, Grindel, and Adder. And these are all just a few miles apart. You could walk from one to the other. And it's a region called Wallonia, or the Walloons. They were known as the Walloons. The red part, the red mark right there in the middle of the map, is where Attert is, the town that Carol and I went to. You can see how close it is to the Netherlands. In fact, sometimes you see windmills there because it's close to the Netherlands. So the family stayed in this area up until about 1874. At this time, a lot of people were leaving for America. The voyages were in ships like that. We don't know exactly what ship that Victor and Elizabeth took, but it would have looked like that. It was called a steamer. And when we met our relatives from Belgium, Wisconsin, they knew the story of the voyage. Victor and Elizabeth had 9 children. No, there were 9 of them altogether. So there were 7 children and then 2 adults. And it was a good thing because they had to work their way over by moving bags of flour from one place to another place. Whenever the wind blew that way, bags of flour had to go over here. Whenever the wind blew that way, they had to move the bags back. And so those sons that they had really came in handy. And one of the sons cleaned himself up and went up on deck for lunch one day, and they said, well, you can't have any lunch. You don't look like you've been working. So from then on, he decided not to clean himself up when he went up for lunch. But they went on a ship just like that. They immigrated in 1847, and we think that they went to the port of Antwerp, which was on the North Sea. And it's a 52-hour walk. They probably had some kind of a railroad at that point they could take for part of the way at least. Or maybe they had stagecoaches, we don't know. But they immigrated from there, Kim. And they took the steamship to America, and they landed in New York, and for some reason, they didn't come right away to the Midwest. They stayed in New York for a few years, and we know that because one of the daughters had some children that were born there. So she must have married somebody and had at least a couple of kids there. And then they rode a boat just like this on the Erie Canal to the Great Lakes. And you know, you can see the Erie Canal today. Have any of you ever seen the Erie Canal? I have. And you can see it in many places in upstate New York. It's a huge ditch. I mean, huge ditch with a river at the bottom of it. And they pulled the boats along, oftentimes with mules. It's very interesting to go see it if you ever get a chance. And the boats look like that. They have recreations of the boats now, and you can ride on it. But why did they leave Europe? Right now, a lot of people go to Europe. It's beautiful. But it wasn't then. In the 1840s, it was a time of warfare, hardship, drought. There wasn't enough food to go around. I went to a German immigration workshop one weekend, and they said that when a man had children, they divided the land all up among those children, and so nobody got anything much. And he said that a person might have a whole family to raise and only have like the shade of a large tree as their property. Not really a lot of property to grow enough food for a whole family. And then another thing I learned at this workshop was that you could be a farmer getting ready to put your crop in, and the king's soldiers might come and say, okay, it's your time to go to the army. Well, so the man had to go and serve in the army. What's going to happen to his wife and 6 children when there's nobody there to feed them and take care of them? So that's one of the reasons they were leaving.